So in this video, we're just going to go through the main user interface once you're within a design. We're going to go through all of the different parts of it so you understand exactly what they are, and then we can really get down to modeling and you can understand exactly what's going on. We're going to start on the top right and work our way around clockwise. So we're going to start with the view cube, which is up here in the top right hand side. Now you'll notice that the view cube, if you hover over it, it has some selections, but the very first thing to note is that if you click on the view cube and drag it around, you'll see that your model starts to change orientation. Now this allows you to orbit around your part and see the different faces. And you'll notice that the view cube itself will change its orientation, so you can always see what you're looking at. It says on the view cube what's the front, the back, top, bottom, all of this, and this you can it's set up as to when you start modeling what direction you want it to face. But you can also click on each of these. So I could click on the front and it would show me the front view. These arrows will appear, and if I click on one of those on the side, it'll switch me by 90 degrees to that side. I'm now on the left. Same goes for the top. You'll also notice these arrows in the top right, which allow you to rotate once you're on a plane. And there's also the home button, which will take you back to the home view. You can also click on the edges or the corners to look at an edge or on a corner. So it's a very useful tool, the view cube, to be able to look around. There are a couple of shortcuts as well. So for orbiting, you can press Shift and the middle mouse button and hold down the middle mouse button and drag it around. And you'll notice that you can also orbit. So you don't have to always go up to the view cube. You can, whilst you're modeling, orbit around. Moving down to the bottom, we have the navigation toolbar. Starting from the left, you have two different types of orbit, constrained and free orbit. Constrained orbit means that moving your mouse left to right will always turn it on the Y, in this case the Y axis, or it might be the Z axis in your file. Whereas if it's a free orbit, it'll be dragged the way that you pull it. So I could drag it from left to right and it would rotate in a different direction. You can see here, if I drag left to right, it's rotating around the part. If I change this to a free orbit, it'll drag the part slightly differently. I personally am going to stick with constrained orbit. I find it a little bit easier to navigate around, but you can choose the one that you feel most comfortable with. After that, we have the look at tool. You can use this to look at a surface. So for example, this surface is at an angle, so there's no option on the view cube, but I can look at it, click on it, and it'll look me at that face directly. You can pan using the pan tool. Click on that, and with the left mouse button, you can click and drag your part around. There is also a shortcut for this, which is very, very useful, which is just clicking the middle mouse button on its own without any buttons, and you can drag. I'm holding the middle mouse button for that. You have zoom, which uses the left button to zoom in and out, and again you can just scroll on the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. You also have a zoom window and a fit. Now a fit, if I'm zoomed all the way in, for example, if I press fit, it'll put my entire part in the window, so you can see everything but no white space. A zoom window will allow me to select a window and it'll zoom me into that part. Finally, on the right here, you have some settings. Normally you don't have to fiddle with these, but you can change your visual style to have wireframe, you can change your background, you can change your effects, your visibility, your camera into perspective. You also have your grid, where you can snap to grid. So here, if I'm on a sketch, for example, and there's a grid, it'll only let my mouse hover over one of the cross points. Normally I leave this off, but it can be quite useful. And you also have multiple views, which allows you to split your screen into multiple views that you can then change. Again, for this, I'm just going to keep it in single view, but the option is there if you want to use it. Below that, we have the timeline. Now, the timeline is one of the most powerful features of Fusion 360. What it allows you to do is go back throughout your modeling process, and it logs everything that you do from the very start. For example, I could go back in my timeline to the very first extrude, and you can see where I started. In fact, I can press the play button down at the bottom, and it runs through exactly how I modeled this aircraft, with the sketches, the shell tool, doing an extrude through with a circle there, 4 holes, plane, all of my ribs, my fillets at the end, my sweep at the end, my body. What this does is it not only allows you to see what's happened, but it allows you to go back and edit things that have happened. For example, I could go back and edit one of these fillets by right-clicking and pressing edit, and it will take me back to when that happened, and I can change the size of my fillet. So I could make this 12mm fillet instead. It will then process everything since then, and it will update the entire design based on that change. I'm just going to undo, Control Z, because the fillet was a good size at the time. This is a really, really useful tool to be able to use. Going back and being able to edit things, it makes it a lot more clean, because if there's a change that needs to be made, you don't necessarily make it at the time. You can go back and correct it from what it was at the beginning, meaning that your design process is so much more clear if you then have to edit that again and again if you're trying to update things. It's really important that you try and use the timeline correctly. Otherwise, what happens is if you start deleting parts or changing parts differently, you'll get errors in your timeline when references are deleted and are no longer there. For example, if you extrude from a sketch, but then you go through and delete that sketch or change it, then you need to make sure that it's updated and the reference is still there. So making sure that you use this properly is something we will go through in quite a lot of detail to make sure you get it right. Moving up, we have comments. This allows you to select a point, a face, or a screenshot and add a comment if you're working with a group. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail now, but it is quite a useful tool when working with other people to be able to comment on specific parts of your design. Next up, you have your browser. I'm actually going to change to a different file here. This is a computer workstation that has been modeled, and we're going to go through the browser in this file. Now, the browser is much like the data panel, your within design filing system. So within this one specific design, all of my objects, my bodies, my sketches, everything is categorized in the browser. You'll see at the top your file name, which links to your tab at the top. And then within that, you have several different parts. What you can do in any design is create a new component here. And what this does is it creates a new part for you to put into your design. Within a component, you might have specific bodies, specific sketches or planes. You might have an analysis or even an image that you've imported. It allows you to very specifically allocate different parts to different components. And it's a really, 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 really important feature. Otherwise, what happens is in a big part like this, my timeline, as you can see, is really quite long. I've gone through a lot, which means that finding things is really difficult if it's all in one folder. You can see here within my table, I have joints, I have other components for the table surface. And within that, I have bodies, I have sketches. When all of these components add up and you have 2 or 3 sketches for each part that you've modeled, you end up at the end with a very long list of sketches, up to 50, 80 sketches. And if you want to go back and edit those sketches and change them or make sure that they're correct, it's really difficult to find them. This way, every piece of information relating to a model is stored within the specific component. If, for example, I wanted to go into the right-hand screen and find a sketch for the base, I could go in, I could find the base, I could find the sketch, and these are all the sketches that I used for that base. So we're going to go again, we're going to make sure that we use components. This isn't the only way to do it. If you're creating a single part in a Fusion file, which actually we are going to be doing, you don't necessarily need to create that many new components because it's all stored in one place. But the browser allows you to do this. Things about the browser that are very useful to know. First of all, you have this little eye on the left-hand side. And this allows you to view or unview things. For example, if I wanted to hide my left-hand screen, I could click the little eye and it would disappear from my view. This is quite useful if you have a lot of parts and you want to really get in and see something. You also have at the top document settings. Here you might want to change your units. I'm using a metric system, I'm in the UK, but if you're using in inches or a different system, this is where you change that. Within that, you have all your different parts. You can right click and have a lot of options. You can edit, you can delete things, and you can find in window and find in timeline. These are both really useful options, and you'll find them if you right click on a part as well. Find in browser. Another thing to note is that if you click on a part, for example the mouse, it will put a blue underline in it, so you can very easily find it in the browser. If I click on this right hand frame, for example, you can see what's in table. If I open that up, it's within table frame. Within that, I can find the exact body that it is. The final thing to note about the browser, which again we'll be going through, is the activation tool. Now on the right hand side of all components is a little button, and you'll see that at the top this button has been a little black dot in it, and that means that this entire file has been activated. What activation does is it makes sure that Fusion knows that you're working within that specific component. If I activated my table surface, for example, here, it would decrease the opacity of all of the other parts so I can see what I'm focusing on. And if I were to create a new sketch, for example, it would put it within my sketches file within this component and not within an overall project file. It also, if you notice, shows only the timeline for that specific component. And it's a really useful way to be able to make sure that what you're doing is really well organized and you can see it really clearly. If I were wanting to edit this extrude, for example, to change the size, or edit the sketch to change the size of my table, without the activation tool, I'd have to sift through all of this here to find it. Whereas here, I can just find it very, very easily with my timeline. To unactivate something, you just go back and you activate the entire file. So the one at the top is your entire model. So you can activate this with the activator, and now you see everything is reactivated. Finally, we're going to go through the bar at the top. Now this is your main modeling tool area. What you have within here is all of the tools that you'll need to create and edit your parts. Starting at the left, you have the different what's called workspaces. In Fusion 360, modeling is definitely not the only thing you can do, and we're going to be doing a lot more than that in this course. First one is design, and this allows you to go through all of your designs and model them correctly. This is where everything normally starts. When you create your design, you create sketches, you create 3D models, and you edit everything to be the way you want it. Within design, you have your solid, which is your typical solid bodies, surface, which deals just with very thin surfaces, sheet metal if you're working with sheet metal, and tools. Other workspaces include stuff like rendering, animation, simulation, or engineering drawings. There are a couple of other ones there, but those are the main ones that we're going to be doing. With the main toolbar in Fusion 360, it's designed that you work from left to right. So you can see here on the left hand side, I have the create menu, which allows me to create a new model. For example, I could create a sketch and then extrude it using this create sketch tool and the extrude tool and create a 3D model. There are a lot of different tools here. I'll talk you through some of them when we use them, but you start with create. Then we move to the right into the next section, which is the modify tool, and you can modify the bodies that you've created in create by adding fillets, chamfers, drafts, scaling them, splitting them in half. After that, you move to the right again and you can assemble them with joints or groups or motion links. Past that, it's fairly add-on stuff, so you have construction, inspect, if you want to inspect a part, insert, and some other options, but you typically move from left to right. What we're going to do is we're going to jump into a new file, and we're going to start looking at modeling our part.